Aiden Cross, a retired U.S. Special Forces soldier, was driving through the frozen ridges of Raven Creek when something made him stop cold. Out there, in the middle of a blizzard, he saw a German shepherd struggling in the snow, its paw trapped in a steel hunting snare, blood melting the ice around it. Aiden jumped out, his breath shaking, his hands trembling as he tried to free the animal. And just when he did, a black SUV appeared from the storm, slowing down, its driver watching him with eyes too calm to be innocent. Who set the trap? And why were they coming back to the very place of cruelty? What happened next will break your heart and restore your faith in miracles. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more soulful stories. The storm over Raven Creek Pass raged with a merciless rhythm, its wind slicing through the valley like a blade of glass. Snow swirled in sheets, devouring the mountain road until it looked less like earth and more like a shifting sea of white. Inside a dented black pickup truck crawling along the ridge, Aiden Cross leaned forward over the wheel, squinting through the frost-streaked windshield. Aiden was 35, broad-shouldered, with the quiet solidity of a man built from discipline rather than ego. His face was angular, framed by a trimmed beard dusted with snow, and his gray eyes carried that distant calm of soldiers who had once seen chaos too closely. A deep scar traced from the left side of his jaw to just below his ear, a thin white reminder of a night in Kandahar when a friend had died in his arms. Since that night, silence had become both his comfort and his punishment. He was no longer an active Green Beret, not since his last deployment left his hearing partially damaged and his heart too tired for politics. But he still moved like a soldier, alert, methodical, the kind of man who scanned every mirror twice even when he was alone. Tonight, he was driving toward a remote radar outpost that had lost signal after the storm began. It was supposed to be a simple task: check the generator, radio in, and head back to the small town of Raven Creek before midnight. But something about this storm felt different, older somehow, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. The wipers scraped across the glass with a rhythmic groan. Outside, trees bent under the weight of snow. Somewhere above the howl of wind came a faint sound, brief, almost lost in the storm, a high-pitched whimper, fragile and broken. Aiden frowned, instinct tightening his chest. He turned down the volume on the radio. The sound came again, clearer this time. It wasn't the wind. It was pain. He killed the engine. Silence swallowed the world. The cold hit him the moment he opened the door, a slap of air so sharp it burned. He grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and stepped into the blizzard. Snow swallowed his boots. Each breath crystallized in front of his face. He followed the sound, weaving between skeletal pines until the beam of light caught something dark at the base of a frozen creek bed. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe a deer carcass tangled in branches. But as he came closer, the shape moved. A German shepherd, large and strong by breed, lay twisted in the snow. One of its hind legs was caught in a steel trap, the cruel metal teeth buried deep into the flesh. Blood had frozen in thin black lines against its tan and sable coat. Aiden's pulse quickened. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the wind. He knelt beside the animal, and the smell of iron and frost filled his lungs. The dog's eyes, one amber, one darker, almost black, flicked toward him, dull with exhaustion but still alive with a spark of mistrust. The trap was old but heavy-duty, likely meant for wolves. He cursed under his breath, fingers already reaching for the combat knife strapped to his boot. The metal was half buried in ice. He worked carefully, sawing at the hinge while snow gathered on his shoulders and melted into the seams of his jacket. Each time he pressed the blade, the dog whimpered, low and trembling, but didn't bite or thrash. "Hang on," Aiden murmured. "We've both been stuck before." His words were more to himself than to the animal. The memory came uninvited, the deafening roar of a mortar, the flash of fire, the weight of his best friend's blood pooling in desert dust. For a moment, he saw that night again, the one he had never forgiven himself for surviving. Finally, the hinge gave. The trap snapped open with a metallic cry. The dog collapsed, its body shaking violently. Without hesitation, Aiden slipped off his parka and wrapped it around the trembling animal. When he lifted it, The dog's head lolled against his chest, its breath faint but steady. The walk back to the truck was brutal. The wind screamed against his ears. His arms burned from the weight, but he didn't slow down. Once inside the cab, he cranked up the heater and laid the dog gently on the passenger seat. He checked the wound, deep but not hopeless. The paw was swollen, punctured by the steel teeth, but the bleeding had slowed. He tore open a field dressing from his medical kit and wrapped it snugly around the leg. The dog stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open again. For the first time, it looked directly at him. "You're not dying tonight," Aiden said softly. "Not while I'm breathing." As he spoke, headlights cut through the storm ahead. A vehicle approached, sleek, black, unmarked. It moved slowly, almost deliberately, hugging the center of the road. Aiden's instincts flared. He leaned slightly forward, his hand hovering near the pistol holstered beneath his jacket. The other car drew level. Through the haze of frost, Aiden caught a glimpse of the driver. A man in his 40s, pale skin stretched over sharp cheekbones, eyes so cold they didn't seem human. The man didn't wave, didn't frown. He just looked, a single, precise look that carried recognition. Then the SUV rolled past and disappeared into the blizzard, its taillights swallowed by white. Aiden sat still for several seconds, the hum of the heater the only sound in the cab. Something about that stare burrowed under his skin, not threat exactly, but certainty, as if that stranger knew exactly what Aiden had just pulled from the snow. He started the engine again, turning the truck downhill toward Raven Creek. The dog shifted slightly, resting its head against the seat. When Aiden reached over to adjust the blanket, the animal pressed its muzzle weakly against his palm. That simple, fragile gesture undid him more than any battlefield ever had. "Good boy," he murmured. "You held the line." Outside, the storm clawed at the world. Inside, warmth flickered between man and animal, a spark of life against an endless winter. But as the truck wound down the mountain, Aiden couldn't shake the image of that black SUV and its driver's lifeless stare. He knew danger when he saw it, and that stare had promised only one thing. They would meet again. The snow had stopped by morning, leaving Raven Creek wrapped in a still, fragile calm. The world outside looked almost innocent again. White rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys, sunlight spilling faintly through the clouds. But Aiden Cross knew better. Storms didn't end when the snow did. They just changed form. Inside the small veterinary clinic off Main Street, warmth struggled against the cold that seemed to cling to everything in town. Dr. Naomi Park moved quickly around the examination table, her dark auburn hair tied in a loose knot that kept slipping from behind her ears. She was in her late 30s, tall, with a slender frame that hinted at both strength and long hours on her feet. Her olive-toned skin glowed faintly in the fluorescent light, and though her face carried the calm of a professional, her eyes, soft brown but sharp with intelligence, betrayed a deep well of empathy. She had returned to Raven Creek 5 years earlier to care for her sick father and never left again, trading Denver's chaos for this quiet valley of snow and ghosts. Valor lay unconscious on the steel table, wrapped in a wool blanket, breathing slow but steady. The leg wound had stopped bleeding after Aiden's field dressing, but infection had already started. Naomi injected an antibiotic, her movements precise. "He's lucky you found him when you did," she said without looking up. Another hour and he would have gone into shock. Aiden stood nearby, still in his heavy winter coat, the fatigue of the previous night written in the slump of his shoulders. "Luck had nothing to do with it," he said quietly. "He was meant to be found." Naomi smiled faintly, but didn't argue. Years in a small town had taught her that soldiers like Aiden carried beliefs deeper than science, beliefs forged in the thin space between life and death. "Hold him still for me," she murmured. She cut away more of the matted fur near the thigh to check for fractures. Her scalpel clicked against something hard. She frowned. "That's strange." "What is it?" Aiden asked, leaning in. Naomi wiped the area clean, then pressed her fingers gently against the skin. "There's something implanted here, not bone." She picked up a small forceps, made a careful incision, and extracted a tiny object, a metallic chip, thin as a coin, glimmering under the light. Aiden's brows drew together. A tracker? Naomi shook her head slowly. No, I've removed plenty of tracking devices from lost pets. This one's different. It's too refined, too deliberate. She set it in a metal tray. And it's pulsing. Feel that? Aiden bent closer. The surface of the chip vibrated faintly, emitting a barely perceptible hum. Something about it made the air feel wrong, like static before lightning. This isn't veterinary tech, Naomi said, her tone tightening. This looks military. The word hung between them like a verdict. Aiden's jaw clenched. Can you isolate the signal? She nodded slowly. I can try, but I don't have the equipment for this. Then I know someone who does. That afternoon, Aiden drove across town to a cabin that sat on the edge of the woods. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he approached the porch. The mailbox still read Lee in peeling letters. Inside, the smell of coffee and solder filled the air. Devin Lee, 37, was not what most people pictured when they thought of a hacker. Compactly built, with neat black hair streaked with early gray, he looked more like a mountain guide than a man who could disassemble an encrypted network in minutes. His left eye bore a faint scar from a childhood accident with shrapnel, giving his gaze a slightly off-center intensity. He'd once worked for a defense contractor before walking away after a classified project resulted in civilian casualties. Since then, he lived quietly, fixing routers for the locals and teaching coding to kids at the community center. When Aiden entered, Devin barely looked up from the circuit board he was soldering. You only show up when something's gone wrong, he said. It's bad, Aiden replied simply, setting the small container on the table. Need you to see what this is. Devin raised an eyebrow, wiped his hands, and examined the object. The hum was faint, but unmistakable. Where did this come from? Dog, Aiden said. German Shepherd. Found him trapped in the storm last night. Vet found this in his leg. Devin frowned. A dog carrying an active signal device? That's not a microchip. That's neural tech. He powered on his terminal, connecting the chip to a diagnostic reader, the screen filled with scrolling code. Devin's eyes narrowed. Damn! This isn't just tracking. It's feedback. It's receiving and sending. Explain, Aiden said. This is military-grade neural override architecture. It suppresses pain receptors, overrides limbic responses, even reroutes adrenaline flow. Whoever built this didn't just want obedience. They wanted endurance. This chip can force an animal to fight until its body collapses. Devin's voice faltered slightly. And it's running active code loops, combat conditioning algorithms. Aiden stared at the screen. So they turned him into a machine. Devin nodded grimly. And they were still testing. This build's experimental. Look here. See this string of IDs? They're unit designations, multiple subjects. That means he wasn't the only one. Aiden felt a chill crawl up his spine. Can you trace it? Devin hesitated. Maybe, but it's encrypted deep. Whoever wrote this knew what they were doing. They left tripwires in the code. Any wrong move wipes the data clean. Aiden crossed his arms, pacing the room. Try anyway. If we don't find where this came from, that dog's suffering was just the start. Devin sighed, rubbing his temples. You never could leave a war alone, could you? Aiden gave a weary smile. Maybe the war just keeps finding me. Back at the clinic, night had fallen again. The blizzard had calmed into soft snowfall, the kind that muffled every sound. Naomi sat by the kennel where Valor rested. The German Shepherd was awake now, his golden eyes tracking her every move. His leg was bandaged, his breathing stronger. When she reached out a hand, he sniffed it before pressing his nose into her palm. You're a good boy, she whispered. Whatever they did to you, you're still here. At the sound of the door creaking, Valor's ears perked up. Aiden entered, shaking snow from his shoulders. His face looked older in the clinic's yellow light. Devin confirmed it, he said. The chip was designed to erase pain and control responses. It wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to weaponize. Naomi's lips tightened. That's cruelty beyond science. Aiden knelt beside Valor. The dog's gaze met his, steady and unafraid. You're not their experiment anymore, Aiden said softly. You're free. You fought through it all, didn't you? The dog blinked slowly, as if understanding. Aiden continued, his voice low, almost reverent. "You earned your name, soldier. From now on, you're Valor." Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering along the frozen eaves like a warning. Naomi glanced toward the window. "Storm's picking up again." Aiden didn't answer. His eyes lingered on the dog, but his mind was elsewhere. On the black SUV, on the stranger's lifeless stare, on the sense that this story was far from over. Somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for the mistake that would lead them back to the thing he'd just saved. And in that silence between heartbeats, Valor lifted his head and growled softly toward the darkened window at something only he could sense. 3 days after the storm, Raven Creek glimmered under a weak winter sun, the kind that gave light but no warmth. The snow had settled in thick drifts across the valley, clean on the surface, but Aiden Cross knew that underneath every inch of that white lay something buried: tracks, secrets, sins. Valor, the German shepherd he had rescued, was healing faster than Naomi Park had expected. The stitches on his leg were clean, his stride more stable. When Aiden opened the kennel each morning, the dog rose immediately, head high, tail low, disciplined, like a soldier waiting for orders. Aiden saw in him the same quiet resilience he once recognized in the eyes of wounded comrades, broken but unyielding. "You've seen hell, haven't you?" he murmured one morning, fastening the leash. Valor tilted his head, as if he understood. The bond between them had grown silent but strong, built not from affection alone, but from shared survival. By late afternoon, Aiden couldn't sit still. The black SUV's image still haunted him, and the chip Devon had decoded gnawed at his mind. He needed to know where Valor had come from. Using the tire marks he'd logged from the night of the rescue, Aiden tracked the route up into the northern ridge, an area once used for logging before the companies pulled out decades ago. The locals called it Ironwood Hollow. The drive up was treacherous. The narrow mountain road was a mess of half-frozen ruts, bordered by sheer drops. The sun sank behind the peaks as he reached the old sawmill, Ironwood Mill, faded letters still clinging to the cracked wooden sign. The place loomed like a corpse of industry, windows boarded, roof sagging under snow, rusted tools buried in drifts. Aiden parked a few meters away and killed the engine. The silence was so deep it hummed. He opened the back door, letting Valor out. The dog sniffed the air, nose twitching, ears stiff. He moved cautiously, the kind of deliberate scanning that came from training. "Easy," Aiden whispered. "We're ghosts here." The door to the mill was chained but brittle with rust. Aiden pried it open with a crowbar from the truck. The metal groaned like a wounded thing. Inside, the air was heavy with decay, a thick blend of iron, old oil, and something more organic. He swept his flashlight across the cavernous room. Rows of iron cages lined one wall, stacked 2 high. Chains hung from beams above, clinking faintly in the draft. The floor was streaked with old stains, dark, dried, impossible to mistake for anything but blood. Aiden's jaw tightened. He had seen slaughterhouses, both human and otherwise, but this was methodical. Near the far wall stood a makeshift table covered in faded papers and photographs. He stepped closer. Dozens of images pinned to the wall showed dogs, various breeds, different stages of condition. Some strong, others skeletal, eyes glazed with terror. Red stamps marked each corner, property of Kinetech, his kid. Breath caught when his light froze on one photograph. Valor. The same sable coat, same scar pattern, but uninjured, standing rigid beside a man in a black tactical uniform. The man's face was turned slightly away, but one detail stood out. A black leather glove on his left hand, the other hand bare, gripping the leash so tightly the veins stood out like cords. Across the photo, scrawled in crimson marker, read, "Batch 7, Raven Creek Experiment." Aiden's stomach clenched. He snapped a photo of it with his phone, then took shots of the cages and documents. He didn't know who Batch 7 was, but the implication was clear. Valor hadn't just been trained, he'd been tested. Near the table sat a small metal cabinet. Inside were syringes, half-used vials, and notebooks filled with coded logs, dates, weights, behavior metrics. He pocketed one of the notebooks, planning to let Devon analyze it later. That was when Valor growled. The sound was low, primal, vibrating through the cold air. Aiden spun, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. Outside, faint at first but growing louder, came the rumble of engines. 2 vehicles, heavy ones. "Damn it," he hissed. He pocketed his phone and moved toward the rear exit, but headlights flared through the broken windows, washing the mill in the pale blue light. Valor barked once, sharp warning. The engine stopped, then doors slammed, 2 of them. Aiden crouched beside a stack of wooden crates peering through a crack in the wall. 2 trucks had blocked both the front and back entrances. Men moved between them, 2 figures, heavy coats, rifles slung low. The first man was broad-shouldered, bald, maybe in his 40s, with the thick neck of a brawler. His name tag read Riker, though it was half torn. The second was leaner, younger, his movements too smooth for a mere driver. They started toward the entrance. Aiden whispered, "Stay." Valor crouched, silent but tense. The men entered, their boots crunching over old sawdust. "He said the tracker stopped here," the younger one muttered, voice nasal, impatient. "So it has to be this dump." The bald man grunted, "Check fast. I don't like being up here. Locals talk." Their flashlight beams swung dangerously close. Aiden waited until one turned away, then slipped to the far corner, signaling Valor with a hand gesture. The shepherd crawled low, noiseless, instincts razor-sharp. When the young one stepped past, Aiden moved, silent, swift. He grabbed the man from behind, yanking him into the shadows. One hand clamped over his mouth. The man struggled, elbowing back, but Aiden's forearm locked around his throat. "Easy," Aiden whispered. "Make noise, and you don't get another breath." The bald man turned suddenly, flashlight cutting across the room. "Ben? You good?" The muffled man kicked once, desperate. Aiden drove his fist into the side of the man's neck, a quick surgical strike. The body went limp. He eased him down quietly, but the sound of that small thud was enough. "Hey!" the bald man barked, raising his weapon. "Who's there?" Valor lunged from the dark barking thunder into the air. The man swung around, firing. Splinters burst from the walls. Aiden ducked, rolling behind a crate, pulling his pistol free. He fired twice. The first shot grazed the man's shoulder. The second shattered a lantern hanging behind him, throwing sparks into the dark. The man roared, clutching his arm. "You don't know what you're doing, soldier," he shouted. "That dog, he's government property." Aiden fired again, hitting the man's thigh. The rifle clattered to the ground. The man dropped to his knees, breathing ragged. Valor stood at Aiden's side, hackles raised, chest heaving. "Talk," Aiden said coldly, stepping forward. The man spat into the snow-streaked floor. "You think you're saving him? He's not yours to save. He's a prototype. You're just delaying orders you don't understand." Aiden kicked the rifle away. "Then, educate me." The man coughed, blood on his lip. "You're too late. Batch 7's just one phase. They've got dozens. You just stole evidence from a national program. You have no idea who you're crossing." Before Aiden could reply, the man's eyes rolled back. He slumped forward, unconscious from blood loss. Aiden exhaled slowly, pulse still hammering. He looked at Valor. The dog's gaze was locked on the open doorway, muscles rigid. Outside, faint through the snow, came a sound that chilled Aiden more than any blizzard ever could. Another engine, larger this time, approaching fast. He holstered his pistol, grabbed Valor's leash. "We're done here," he muttered. "Move." As they ran toward the rear, the air trembled with the roar of tires and floodlights cutting through the falling snow. Something much bigger was coming. The morning broke cold and razor-sharp over Gray Mesa, a plateau of jagged cliffs and frozen rivers lying 50 miles north of Raven Creek. The storm clouds that had haunted the valley for weeks were gone, leaving behind a sky too clear, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath before something terrible. From a ridge overlooking the valley, Aiden Cross adjusted the strap of his tactical vest, eyes scanning the horizon through a pair of binoculars. Below, the complex of Kinetech behavioral systems sprawled across the snowfield, low concrete buildings half buried under frost, a single communications tower stabbing upward like a needle. Trucks were parked in neat lines, guards in black gear patrolling the perimeter. It looked less like a research site and more like a fortress. Beside Aiden stood Agent Melissa Carter of the HSI. She was in her early 40s, athletic build, tall and poised, her dark hair pulled into a sharp ponytail beneath a beanie. Her face bore the calm authority of someone who had spent years walking into dangerous rooms and walking back out alive. Yet there was something heavy in her gaze, a weariness born not of fear but of repetition. Her younger brother had vanished during a classified operation linked to Kinetech 5 years ago. No body ever found, no answers given. That personal loss was why she had pushed for this raid herself. Carter lowered her binoculars. "You sure about this?" Aiden's voice was low, but steady. "We wait longer. They move everything underground. We hit now or lose them for good." She nodded once, then turned to the team assembled behind them, 6 agents in gray tactical suits, faces hidden behind balaclavas. At the far end of the line, Sheriff Daniel Moore of Silver Butte County stood out in his winter deputy coat, older and heavier than the rest, but his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. A man of simple values, Moore had seen enough strange reports from Kinetech trucks passing through his county to know something dark was festering there. "We move on your mark," Moore said. Aiden adjusted his earpiece. "We go silent until breach. Carter, you take the west flank with your men. I'll go through the service tunnel. Moore, you hold the south road. If they try to flee, box them in." Carter smirked faintly. "Still giving orders, soldier?" "Only because you're letting me," Aiden replied. She didn't argue. The wind picked up as they descended the ridge. The snow crunched underfoot, each step sinking deep. Aiden moved first, Valor trotting at his side, muscles taut beneath his thick coat. The dog's leg had healed almost completely, though the scar was still visible, a reminder of both pain and purpose. They reached the tunnel entrance, a rusted hatch half hidden by a drift. Aiden pried it open with a crowbar. The air that rushed out smelled of disinfectant and something chemical, sterile yet wrong. He clipped a flashlight to his vest and motioned. "Valor forward." Inside, the tunnel walls were concrete, lined with frost and steel pipes that hummed faintly. Far ahead, muffled sounds echoed, metal clanging, faint barking, mechanical whirring. Valor's ears twitched. He pressed closer to Aiden's leg. At the end of the passage, they reached a heavy door with a security pad. Aiden pulled a small device from his pocket, a signal scrambler given by Devon. It blinked twice, overriding the lock. The door slid open. The sight beyond stopped Aiden cold. Rows upon rows of cages stretched across the warehouse. Dozens of dogs, German shepherds, Belgian Malinois, even Labradors, each fitted with collars wired to small metal boxes. Some barked weakly, others lay still, eyes glazed from sedation. The air was filled with the sound of machines pumping air, beeping rhythmically like heart monitors. On a raised platform, Drake Blackwell stood, watching everything with the detachment of a man admiring his own architecture. Blackwell was in his late 50s. Tall and lean, his silver hair slicked back with precision. He wore a gray overcoat that looked expensive enough to belong in a boardroom, not a laboratory. His angular face was almost handsome in a cold, mathematical way. He had once been a neuroscientist for DARPA until funding cuts and ethics committees drove him into the private sector. Where others saw conscience, Blackwell saw inefficiency. To him, perfection required control, and control required pain. "Mr. Cross," he called out, voice smooth as silk. "You made good time." Aiden's pistol came up instinctively. "Call off your men." Blackwell smiled faintly. "They already know you're here. You think I didn't expect this? Valor's chip went dark the moment your little hacker friend touched it. We've been tracking you ever since." At that, the ground trembled slightly. Aiden glanced up, realizing what was happening. Charges, preset detonations around the ridge. Blackwell was collapsing the access tunnels. "Jesus," Aiden muttered. "He's sealing us in." From his earpiece, Carter's voice cut through static. "Aiden, pull out now! They're blowing the north wall!" But there was no time. Valor barked sharply, running toward the cages. Dogs stirred, whining, sensing freedom near. Aiden followed, shooting the lock from the nearest cage. "Move!" he shouted. He worked fast, unlocking one after another. The animals poured out, tails low, uncertain, but drawn to Valor's bark like soldiers recognizing their commander. Gunfire erupted from the upper walkway, guards in black armor firing down. Aiden dove behind a steel crate, returning fire. Valor darted between shadows, dragging at the leash, positioning himself between Aiden and the bullets. The chaos was deafening. Barking, shouting, the roar of explosions outside as the avalanche traps triggered. On the mezzanine, Blackwell raised a small detonator. "You can't stop evolution, Captain," he called. "We're building what you couldn't, obedience without doubt." Aiden rose, eyes hard. "You built monsters." "No," Blackwell said. pressing the switch. "I built soldiers." The floor shuddered. A section of ceiling collapsed, snow and debris crashing down. The lights flickered. Aiden grabbed Valor and dove aside as a steel beam smashed where they had been standing. When the dust cleared, Aiden saw Blackwell limping toward an emergency hatch at the far end. He fired once, grazing the man's arm. Blackwell staggered but didn't fall. "You'll see, Mr. Cross," he hissed. "The world doesn't need loyalty. It needs control." Then he vanished through the door as the alarms blared. Aiden turned back to the cages. Valor barked, herding the frightened dogs toward the exit tunnel. Above them, red lights flashed as sprinklers burst, showering them in freezing mist. Outside, Carter's team breached the west entrance, weapons ready. "Move, move," she shouted, her voice cut through the chaos. Aiden pushed Valor forward, guiding the last of the dogs through the smoke. Carter met them halfway, grabbing his arm. "Where's Blackwell?" she demanded. "Gone," Aiden said grimly, but he left his message. Behind them, the facility groaned as another explosion ripped through its core. Flames met snow, and the air filled with steam and the cries of freed animals. From the nearby ridge, Naomi Park, wearing a heavy parka and holding her phone, filmed the entire scene. The live stream had gone viral within minutes, drawing thousands of viewers across the country. Her voice trembled as she narrated, "They're saving them, every single one. Please, if you're watching this, share it. The world needs to see what's been done here." As sirens wailed in the distance, Aiden stood amid the chaos, snow stained red beneath his boots. Valor limped beside him, muzzle flecked with ash but eyes bright. Carter looked around at the burning facility. "You realize this just made you a target?" Aiden nodded slowly. "Let them come. I'm not hiding anymore." And somewhere behind the rising smoke on a far mountain road, a black helicopter lifted into the dawn. Its passenger, Drake Blackwell, clutching his wounded arm and smiling faintly into the storm. The last of the snow melted slowly from the hills of Starlight Ridge, leaving behind the smell of wet pine and thawed earth. A thin golden light stretched across the valley, soft as breath after a long cry. For the first time in months, Raven Creek was quiet. No sirens, no gunfire, only the faint sound of wind brushing through the firs. It had been a month since the Gray Mesa raid, since fire and ice had swallowed Kinetech's last facility. In that time, a temporary rescue shelter had become something greater, a sanctuary. The Starlight Ridge Rehabilitation Center had been built on the bones of an abandoned ranger station, its wooden cabins restored by volunteers, the yard fenced off for open space where dogs could run freely again. Aiden Cross stood by the fence, hands buried in his coat pockets. His beard had grown in slightly, flecked with silver. The scar along his jawline was still visible, but his eyes, once filled with exhaustion, now carried something softer. Peace didn't come easy for soldiers. It arrived like a truce you weren't sure you deserved. Yet here he was, alive, watching Valor sprint through the yard. Valor had changed too. His coat, once dull and patchy, now shimmered in the morning light, dark sable fading to silver along his back. His stride was powerful again, but what caught Aiden most was the way the dog's eyes had changed. They no longer held that haunted, calculating gleam of an animal trained to obey pain. They reflected freedom. Behind him, Naomi Park walked up carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She wore a wool sweater and a heavy coat, her auburn hair loose this time, wind-tossed and natural. Her face looked less tired, more alive than Aiden had ever seen it. She handed him a cup. "You look like a man who doesn't know how to sit still." Aiden smirked faintly. "I'm learning, slowly." Naomi leaned on the fence beside him. The vet team's reporting all clear. No infections, no residual trauma responses. Valor's officially a healthy dog again. "He's more than that," Aiden said quietly. "He's a survivor." Naomi smiled. "So are you." For a while neither spoke. The quiet around them was too honest to fill with words. Further down the hill, a convoy of black SUVs approached, federal vehicles, but these carried a different energy. From the first car stepped Agent Melissa Carter, now in civilian clothes. Her hair was down for once, soft waves catching the sun. Though her face still carried the sharp edges of an agent, her eyes held warmth. She waved lightly as she climbed the slope toward them. "You've built something here," she said. "Looks better than most government shelters I've seen." Naomi grinned. "That's because it's run by people, not policy." Carter nodded approvingly, then turned serious. "Blackwell's in federal custody. They caught him 2 states over trying to reach a private airstrip. He's being charged with bioethics violations, animal cruelty, and corporate conspiracy. It's going to be a long trial. Aiden exhaled slowly. He'll find a way to justify it all. Men like him always do. Maybe, Carter said. But his system's gone. We found data caches linking Kinetech's funding to private defense contracts. Every account's frozen. Justice? Naomi asked. Something close, Carter said. Then her gaze softened. The story Naomi posted reached over 20 million views. Donations are pouring in for Starlight Ridge. You're not just saving dogs anymore. You've started a movement. Aiden looked out at the field, where Valor was now play-fighting with 2 other shepherds. I didn't start anything, he murmured. He did. Carter smiled. Then maybe that's how it was meant to be. A sudden bark drew their attention. Valor had stopped playing and was staring toward the far tree line. A man was approaching slowly, wearing a ranger's uniform, tall, broad, with a kind face half hidden under a thick beard. Reverend Samuel Hale, the local pastor, had once served as a wilderness ranger before dedicating his life to helping veterans reintegrate. His gait was steady but slightly uneven from an old knee injury. His eyes were the color of winter clouds, calm but full of depth. Morning, Aiden, he greeted warmly. They told me you'd be here. Reverend, Aiden nodded. Didn't expect church to come to me. Hale chuckled, voice low and patient. The church isn't a building, son. It's where grace shows up. He crouched to greet Valor, who approached cautiously at first, then pressed his head into the man's hand. The Reverend smiled. Strong spirit, this one. Seen more than most people ever will. He saved lives, Aiden said. And maybe he's still saving yours, Hale replied, eyes lifting. You've carried weight long enough, soldier. Maybe it's time to put it down. Aiden looked away, the words hitting deeper than he expected. Easier said than done. True. Hale stood, brushing snow from his gloves. But every dawn begins with letting go of the night. Later that morning, they gathered in the small wooden chapel overlooking the valley. It had once been an equipment shed, but Naomi and volunteers had transformed it. Pine pews polished, candles lining the windowsills. The air smelled faintly of cedar and hope. The room was full. Townspeople, agents, veterinarians, a few soldiers who had come quietly, not to be seen but to bear witness. In the front, Reverend Hale stood beside Valor, who sat calmly beside Aiden's chair, tail curled neatly around his paws. Hale raised his hand and said, We gather not just to celebrate victory, but to remember what was lost and what was found. His gaze turned to Valor. Sometimes the angels God sends don't come with wings. Some walk on 4 legs, some teach us to forgive, and some remind us that even in man's cruelty, creation still finds a way to heal. Silence filled the chapel. Aiden felt something loosen in his chest, grief maybe, or the first fragile strand of peace. He looked down at Valor, whose amber eyes met his. When the service ended, the old bell above the chapel rang out, its echo rolling across the valley. Aiden stepped outside with Valor at his side. Snow glittered faintly on the ground, but spring was already whispering beneath it. Naomi joined him, her breath clouding in the cold. You ever think about what's next? She asked. Aiden glanced at the horizon. Maybe build something real this time. Not walls, homes, maybe for people like us. She smiled. Then you'll need help. He returned the smile. Good thing I know a stubborn vet who doesn't take no for an answer. From somewhere behind them, Carter called out, Smile for the press, hero. But her tone was teasing. Aiden laughed quietly. Valor barked once in agreement. Together, they watched the sunrise climb over Starlight Ridge, spilling gold over everything it touched. The dog lifted his head, eyes glowing with life. For the first time in a long while, Aiden didn't think about war or guilt or ghosts. He thought only of this moment, this dawn, and the silent promise inside it that compassion would always outlast the darkness. Sometimes God's miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from heaven. They come quietly, through loyalty, courage, and love that refuses to fade. Aiden thought he was saving a wounded dog, but perhaps in truth, God sent Valor to save him, to remind us all that redemption can take many forms, even one with fur and gentle eyes. In a world that often feels cold or cruel, small acts of compassion still have the power to change everything. Maybe there's a valor in your own life, a person, an animal, or even a moment of kindness that pulled you out of the storm. Hold on to that. Believe that no matter how dark the night gets, faith, mercy, and love will always find a way through. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little light today. Tell us in the comments what part spoke to you most, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story of hope, healing, and faith. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His quiet miracles continue to walk beside you, sometimes on 2 feet and sometimes on 4.